Hey everybody, I'm Sean.
And I'm Kieran.
Welcome to another episode of Angling Spiders. Welcome back everybody. As you can see, we are once again in our backyard, and that's because we are currently in between the ice fishing season and the open water season here in southern Alberta. Because of that, we're pretty limited in terms of where we can go fishing at the moment. We could go to the Bow River, but for the most part, we're limited everywhere else until the season opens up again on May 1st. So because of that, on today's episode, we're going to spend a little bit of time reflecting on the differences between kayak fishing and ice fishing and our thoughts on how that went, comparing our first couple seasons of kayak fishing to the most recent season we spent out learning how to do ice fishing. Before we get to that though, I just want to say that we are coming up on our second anniversary as a channel, and it's been a great ride so far. Pretty crazy actually. In our first year we had about 200 subscribers, and most recently here we've gained about 200 subscribers in the last 3 months. So great success in terms of the number of people who are watching us, and it's greatly appreciated. And we're looking forward to creeping ever closer to that 1,000 mark. So yeah,
for sure. And so because of all this, we've decided to launch another giveaway. So in today's episode, we're going to be going over the details of how to win one of our custom Len Thompson Angling Spider lures. So stay tuned to the end of the video to find out more information on that.
All right, so let me get into what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so what I'm going to do is rate both ice fishing and kayak fishing on a number of different categories. And the first one I'm going to start with here is access. So on the surface, it would seem that there's a clear advantage to ice fishing in terms of accessing locations on a lake. Basically, you can go anywhere, and if the ice is good, you can drive on the lake for a part of the season. And while this is true, you still need to drill holes. And so moving around on the lake is a little bit more effort if you have to be drilling holes all over the place and locating the fish. On the kayaking side, it's basically limited to your physical fitness. So even for us in the beginning, we weren't going much further than 1 kilometer or 2 when we were going out to the lakes. And now, depending on the size of the lake, we might actually be able to cover almost the entirety of a small lake. So, if I use Badger as an example, on Badger, we can basically get around the entire lake in a day. The benefit of this is that if the fish aren't biting, you can move very quickly with not very much effort in a kayak. So with that, I would still say that there's a slight edge here to ice fishing, and particularly if you have a power auger. Now we don't, but if you do, you can move around pretty quickly and get to most areas. So I'll give it the edge on access. So the second one I want to talk about is safety. And if it's been really cold outside and the ice conditions are good, ice fishing is generally pretty safe. This becomes a little bit more challenging if it's early in the year or late in the season and the ice hasn't either set up yet or is starting to melt. But that's not the only time that ice can be dangerous. There's also the potential for ice cracking, which can happen at any time. And due to some conditions on certain lakes, there's also the potential for there to be thin spots. There's also the separate concern of the use of propane heaters in a tent and the potential for carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's also something that needs to be considered, particularly in our case, because we started using a tent this year. With kayaks, your main concern is a little bit different, and it tends to be a concern around capsizing or running into bad weather while you're out there. And so while we've been out ourselves in some pretty windy conditions, that hasn't been an issue for us yet. If you look at the forecast before you go out, if you're checking wind conditions, typically you can be prepared for what might be coming. The other thing in kayaks you need to be aware of is motorized boats, because sometimes they do go around your kayak and you got to make sure that they can see you and you don't want to get hit. So that's probably our biggest concern when we're on a lake that also has some larger boats on it. Given all those considerations, in this case, I'm going to give the edge to kayak fishing, just because I have been a lot more concerned both driving and walking on the ice. And just as a heads up, we did actually see somebody go through the ice this year. That ice was on that lake was about 12 inches thick, and it just happened to be that there was a thin spot, and the person we were fishing with actually went through the ice. And thankfully they were okay and close to getting their clothes changed, but it was a pretty scary situation for us. So just based on that alone, I gotta give the edge on safety here to kayak fishing. All right, the next one I want to talk about is shelter. And if you have a tent and a heater like we now do, it can be very comfortable ice fishing even when it's very cold outside. With ice fishing, you can go out on pretty windy conditions quite easily as long as you stake down your tent. Whereas kayaks are a lot more open to the elements, so it can be more challenging to fish, for example, in the rain, or if it's a really windy day, it can become a safety concern as well. And it can also be quite difficult to paddle when it's a windy day, or also to stabilize yourself if you're trying to fish in a certain area. So you need to be careful about making sure that you've got the right clothes, that you're prepared to get back to the shore very quickly if something changes. And lastly, in a kayak, you need to worry about sun exposure. So in the height of summer, you're going to need sunscreen. Typically, you're out there for a long time, so sunburns can happen pretty easily. And that's just not something that's going to happen when you're ice fishing. So if you have a setup like we do, this one is a clear win for ice fishing. The next category I want to rate is basically fitness level, or how easy it is to do ice fishing versus kayak fishing. For us, clearly unloading, loading, and paddling a kayak all day is going to require some level of physical fitness. But you don't have to be an athlete. Basically, if you're going short distances, it does not require a lot of effort. And the other piece of it is, the more you get out in your kayak, the better you get over time, as I mentioned previously. On the ice fishing side, honestly, I thought ice fishing would be a better break from physical activity, but that just isn't the case with our particular setup. So when we go ice fishing, there's still quite a bit of gear that we have to haul, and the biggest activity for us is drilling holes. And we have a manual 8-inch auger, and I was pretty surprised at how much effort it takes to actually get through the ice, especially later in the season as the ice gets thicker in that 18 to 24 inch range in depth. It's a lot of work to get that 8-inch auger through the ice, and we're pretty tired after we drill even 3 or 4 holes, and we have to take a break. So given that, it's actually quite a bit more effort than I thought it would be. And since we don't have an electric or a motorized auger, basically what I'm going to do is leave this one as a tie. If we had a motorized auger, then there's no question that kayaking would require more fitness and stamina. But in this case, I think it's probably somewhat equal. So the next category I'd like to look at is gadgets and toys that you can add on when you're kayak fishing and ice fishing. And while we have modified our Pelican Mission 100s quite a bit for fishing, we don't actually have a lot of gear on them that I would consider as a gadget. The most obvious is our Garmin Striker 4 that's on my kayak, and the associated Scotty transducer arm mount. We don't use it that much to locate fish, but instead it's used to target both the depth of the water and some structure. And for that, it's been absolutely incredible. I think personally that ice fishing has way more potential for gadgets. So we already use our Garmin Striker 4 and transfer it over to ice fishing, as we showed in the last video, but we use it in a different setup. And so for ice fishing, we're using it in flasher mode, which is about monitoring the depth of the water, the depth of our bait, and also to see the fish strikes. This year we also made our homemade hook setters or jaw jackers that Kieran put together. That's kind of a gadgety thing. And the next step for us is to get an underwater camera. And that's something we're actually already looking into for the next ice fishing season. So I think the edge on gadgets here clearly goes to ice fishing. I think you can pick up all kinds of toys for that for the most part just don't fit in the kayak. So the next category I want to look at here is results. Basically what I'm looking at here is our ability to catch fish. Are we better at catching fish with kayaks or in the ice fishing tent? Now, to be fair, we've had 2 full seasons of kayak fishing and only 1 season of ice fishing. So I'm not sure that this is a valid comparison at this point. But if I look at the number of times that we've gone out fishing and caught something versus being skunked, for ice fishing this year, we went out 8 times and we were skunked twice. And if I look at kayak fishing, even though we've had a lot of success, looking at our 2020 season, we went out 17 times this summer and we were skunked 4 times. So proportionally, it's about exactly the same. In terms of the number of fish, we did okay both ways, but I would give a slight edge here to kayak fishing, as those days did tend to be more productive. I think this is simply because in a kayak, we tend to move more often if the fish aren't biting, and in the ice fishing tent, because we don't want to drill a whole bunch of holes, we're a little bit more patient in waiting for the fish to bite. Lastly here, I just want to evaluate one final category, and that is fun. And, you know, the real question here is, do we have fun kayak fishing and ice fishing? As I mentioned a minute ago, we just started kayak fishing 2 years ago, and even though we only have a couple of cheap sit-in kayaks from Costco, it's been an absolute blast. We've learned a lot from since those first episodes, and we've been able to go to some areas where we've had really, really good success. I think one of the reasons for that is because since we're in kayaks, we can get into some shallow water bays and other areas that some boats can't get into. And this has been exceptionally good for pike fishing, which is obviously something we do a lot of. We can get next to those weed beds and into those shallow water areas that the larger boats can't get into at all. And that means they face less fishing pressure. And so when we can get to those spots, we tend to be pretty successful. We think this is going to serve us well if we ever get a chance to try bass fishing. And we do have some plans to try to be able to do that this year. And some of the lakes we're targeting also have some pretty weedy areas, and so I think the kayak's going to be an advantage into getting into some of those spots. On the ice fishing side, it was also a great year once we got all of our gear. I'll be completely honest, our first trip out was pretty miserable. We didn't have a tent, we didn't have a heater, we didn't really even know what we were doing, and it wasn't that fun. And so we talked it over, and of course very quickly we came to the decision that we wanted to gear ourselves up. And so we got that Frable Bro Series tent, we got the Mr.Heater, and we got the chairs in there, and suddenly it was way more comfortable and a lot more fun. We also got to go to a few lakes that we normally wouldn't go to with the kayaks, just because we could drive onto them in the winter. And I would say that once you're set up, you got your tent up, you got your holes drilled, it's definitely easier fishing than it is in a kayak. And what I mean by that is it's a little bit more relaxing. You get a nice comfortable chair, you got your heater on, you can sit there and have a good conversation with the person you're fishing with. So from that perspective, it's an entirely different experience, and it's a different kind of fun than when you're in a kayak. So this one's a tie for sure, and that's because to us, both ways are fantastic, and no matter how you get out fishing, it's always a great day. So all right, so let's look at the overall, and basically I'm gonna say it's tied. As it sits, I've given 5 points to ice fishing and 4 points to kayak fishing, but basically They're so different in terms of the activities that they both have their pros and cons. And for us, you know, we find that while there's some challenges, there's also a lot of rewards. And so we don't really prefer either. So that's it, everybody. That's my thoughts on kayak fishing versus ice fishing. Pretty much all of how I assessed it, but what do you think?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that you said, especially on the shelter one. Even though it can be pretty cold in the winter, that the tent and the heater really help to heat things up, and sometimes in the kayak it can get a little chilly. So yeah, I pretty much agree with everything said there. So
all right, so that's it for today's episode. But before we go, as we mentioned before, we want to give you guys a chance to win one of our Len Thompson Angling Spiders lures, and Kieran's going to give you the details of that right now.
yeah. So one more time, here's the lure that you can enter to win. So to do that, all you got to do is go down in the comment section below. Tell us if you like ice fishing, if you like boat fishing, if you even like short fishing. Just let us know in the comments. You can also say whether you agree with the stuff that we said, or if you disagree, just you can give us your opinions down below. And make sure to leave #giveaway beside your comment so that we know that you want to enter for the giveaway. Yeah, and we're going to announce that in a couple of videos. So that's pretty much it for us. If you liked the video, smash that like button, hit subscribe. Until next time, good fishing.